And we are a go. Salvete omnes. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities and alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to carry on with the project today, looking at Civilization's Dawn, weeks 6 and 7 of 13 from our fall volume. I'll remind yourself and myself what the project is here at the college momentarily. Well, let's get some nice background music on, and that will be, well, we have the Chinese mentioned in week 6, so let's try some traditional Chinese music. All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay, here we are. Welcome indeed, and now let's get the screen share queued up. So the project, if you're new to this concept, is a variable curricula here at Apocatastasis. So first things first, by variable, I mean that there are many ways you can apply yourself to this study of human history. So fundamentally, the project is the complete study of human history over a 3-year cycle, and then we begin again. And there we go. One of these beautiful tabs that I sometimes have to cast about for what I want. And we use for the project the principal text being H.G. Wells's outline of history. And make that slightly quieter. And in addition to that, we have for every single week ancillary readings, which elaborate on Wells and give us other perspectives. And then whilst the full study from, we'll say, Adam and Eve to the space age is 3 years, every month we have a core of 250 poems, which we read through and then start again. So if this sounds like the breviary, this is not for nothing. It's very much modeled on that cycle system, that teaching system, really. We don't think of liturgical books as teaching books, but so they are. And one way you can apply yourself to this study is simply to follow along with these weekly check-ins. We don't get that deep into it, but that might be okay, especially if we're rusty on these sciences. It might be, especially for the first go through, enough to read through the text and to have a few highlights brought before our eyes. However, the project also has deeper applications if you have that itch which wants to be scratched, whether that's every fortnight we meet in a seminar privately, or even once a month for a big old seminar. Those are especially popular with our adult students. And then, especially for high school and traditional college age students, as a complete substitute of whatever coursework they would be taking, the full enrollment in the project where we meet intensively 4 days a week, looking not just at history, but also at literature, languages, particularly Latin and Greek, looking at poetry, philosophy, all of which, and this is what makes the project unique, all of which being taught in a symphonic, unified fashion. This is what makes Apocatastasis different from every other school, regardless of the course, and certainly with the project. The project is this symphonic, coordinated study of human life. We're not bouncing around like modern pedagogy, public, private, and home does. Anyhow, that's the rundown of the project, and you can see all sorts of good things related here too. I can see Rumble is having a cranky morning when you see these do not load things. If you refresh the page often, that will solve itself. By way of advertisement, as we get going here, we are also running in a couple weeks a course called the Sons of Issachar, Historical Cycles. And so we're going to look at people like St. Augustine, Ibn Khaldun, Oswald Spengler, the Neil and Howe cycles. We're going to look at this concept, first of all, of historical cycles, and then see the different theories that people have as to what moves history, if history in fact does move. We can even have that discussion. We will have that discussion. So this course, it runs for 13 weeks, I believe. 10 weeks. This 10-week course is $150. That works out to $15 a class, which is less than you'd pay for fast food meal, God help us at this hour. And you will get into some very, very deep concepts in Western and Eastern historiography. So that's called the Sons of Issachar. And without further ado, we get into our topic here. Like I say, you can download the project PDF right from our website there, and it's down below in the description. All right, well, we are week 6 and 7. Sometimes the days get ahead of you, hence last week, and hence why we're smushing 2 weeks together, but I'd have it no other way. And we have finally arrived at writing, which means we have finally arrived at civilization. Of course, these things take forever to load. Writing is the necessary ingredient to have history. You cannot study history properly without writing. You can buttress it with the study of archaeology. You can have ancillary data sources, perhaps grave sites, as a specific example of archaeology. Artwork, cave artwork we've looked at. And these sorts of things, castings in garbage pits and so forth. Yes, they can all shine a light, a necessary light. History, perhaps in the past, was too exaggeratedly focused on the written, and it has diversified over, especially the last 60, 70 years or so, to include other data inputs. But fundamentally, the backbone of history is writing, because without writing, you can't have thoughts contained in a very logical sense, at least. Okay, let's try to dig up the page we need here. And of course, close but no cigar. Now, today we're going to look at the invention of writing. We have an auxiliary document queued up to that effect. And then we will also look at the voyage of Hanno, because H.G. Wells himself includes this remarkable journey around Africa by the Carthaginian navigator. So this is not cooperating. Okay, apparently now it's cooperating. All right. Hey, there we go. Alhamdulillah. By the way, as I find what I'm looking for, there are counter arguments to H.G. Wells, and these will feature in the final edition of the project, including a couple essays by Belloc, Brother Belloc, the British author, France, and also G.K. Chesterton, who wrote an entire book rebutting certain more philosophical aspects of this work, and that's called The Everlasting Man. Okay. So I will just pick up here and muck about and then get into our proper essay here. So you try to queue up all this beforehand, and then it gets all howled up with pop-ups and all this jazz. Now, the first type of writing that we have is cuneiform. And there are some examples if they're going to cooperate. I'm just going to have to reload the darn thing. These are some statues from Assyria, Babylonia, Sumeria. This is cuneiform from Sumeria, and you can see that it's formed by pressing in a stylus or a writing implement into wet clay in a certain systematic fashion, which is obvious here. And these produce the symbols of cuneiform. And there's a great variety, even now, of languages and alphabets, and that's not new. H.G. Wells lays that out in this week's reading. They fertilized their fields, speaking of the Sumerians, by letting water run through irrigation trenches, and they gradually become very skillful hydraulic engineers. They had cattle, asses, sheep, and goats, but no horses, and their collections of mud huts grew into towns, and their religion raised up tower-like temple buildings. These are the ziggurats. Here's an example, at least so what's left of one. Interesting, these sorts of buildings, and we'll get into Egypt in this week's reading as well. These huge pieces of masonry, and oftentimes when it comes to Sumeria and Babylonia, a lot of the production is in mud bricks. There are huge palaces in those kingdoms in the archaeological sites, but unfortunately, they're outside of this example. A lot of the big examples in that part of the world in Mesopotamia are mud, and after some thousands of years, you can imagine they're not holding up as well, though probably better than you or I would hold up if we were around that long. Clay dried in the sun was a very great fact in the lives of these people. This lower country of the Euphrates Tigris valleys had little or no stone. They built of brick. They made pottery and earthenware images, and they drew and presently wrote upon thin tile-like cakes of clay. The Sumerians do not seem to have had paper or to have used parchment. Their books and memoranda, even their letters, were potsherds. At Nippur, they built a great tower of brick to their chief god, El-Ilul. That's standardized as Enlil, the memory of which is supposed to be preserved in the story of the Tower of Babel. So now you can see this reference to the ziggurat in the Holy Bible. They seem to have been divided up into city-states, which warred amongst themselves and maintained for many centuries their military capacity. Their soldiers carried long spears and shields and fought in close formations. Sumerians conquered Sumeria. Sumeria remained an unconquered land by any strange race for a very long period of time indeed. They developed their civilization, their writing, and their shipping. We're going to talk about that with Hanno, shipping, through a period which may be twice as long as the whole period from the Christian era to the present time. So perhaps a footprint of 4,000 years. First of all known empires was that founded by the high priest, the god of the Sumerian city of Erech. It reaches as an inscription at Nippur from the lower Persian Gulf to the upper Mediterranean or perhaps Red Sea. Among the mud heaps of the Euphrates Tigris Valley, the record of that vast period, that first half of the age of civilization, is buried. There flourished the first temples and the first priest rulers that we know of among mankind. And so we can see very early on that connection of civilization to a religion. Almost everything that we see in life spins out of the cult, out of the religious center, whether that's education or artistic displays of one sort or another, or government. Very interestingly, these come out of, their spin-offs, quite literally, of the original priest rulers and the original temple center of society. Sports would be very much a spin-off of religious ritual. And I'm not just saying that in a passive-aggressive sense. Modern sports or the religion of the modern man. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that going back thousands of years, you can see this sports ritual was sometimes a way of divination, sometimes a way of propitiation of the gods. And then eventually it spins off like art and certain types of architecture and so forth. Okay. Then there's a long treatment of the peoples moving, whether that's the Sumerians, he gets into Egypt, which we'll return to later on, gets into the Assyrians, makes a note that there's no linguistic connection between Syria and Assyria, the Chaldeans. The Hebrews are very briefly addressed here. The Akkadian Empire with Sargon. The Stone Age, we carry on, remains in Egypt are a very uncertain date. There are Paleolithic and Neolithic remains. It is not certain whether the Neolithic pastoral people who left those remains were the direct ancestors of the later Egyptians. And this gets into the theory, which seems to be gaining more and more ground a century after this publication, that there were people in Egypt before the Egyptians. And that's how you get your Sphinx. And perhaps that's where you get all of those monuments, that those monuments are not from the ancient Egyptians or from a people earlier than they. And to buttress this point, I bring to our attention this article on the slide here, and this is pyramids might be a lot older than we think. And of course, when you get into alternative archaeology, strangely enough, the search engines and the mainstream gets very touchy. It's very interesting. Why on earth? I'll spare you the Google searches, but why on earth would the mainstream be so protective about the traditional so-called dating, their traditional dating of the pyramids? Why are there all these articles poo-pooing this thesis? You can ask yourself that. Now, the mainstream has pretty much given up trying to pretend that the Sphinx is contemporary with the building of the pyramids. Even they have to admit that it's a much, much, much older piece, and arguably had the head of a proper lion before it was shaved down to being the head of presumably a pharaoh. You can see the head is completely out of proportion with the somewhat reconstructed legs and the torso of the lion. So the idea is that originally this was an actual lion's head. In prehistoric African, the original prehistoric African structure, and then it was shaved down and eroded by sands, and looks like eroded also by water. Anyhow. But no, it couldn't possibly be the case for the pyramids, right? Roll your eyes. The ancient Egyptian pyramids are one of the most enduring architectural marvels in human history. These colossal structures have fascinated scholars, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries, leaving us in awe of the engineering prowess and cultural significance they represent. However, despite extensive research, the exact age of the pyramids remains a topic of debate. Recent discoveries and alternative theories suggest that these extraordinary monuments might be older than previously believed. In this article, we will delve into the evidence that fuels this controversial hypothesis. So the traditional timeline. According to conventional Egyptology, the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, began around 2580 BCE and took approximately 20 years to complete. The other two pyramids on the Giza Plateau, built for pharaohs Khafre and Menreka, follow in succession. This timeline is largely based on inscriptions, artifacts, and historical records found in and around the pyramids. The Sphinx and water erosion. We'll take a look at that picture in a moment again. One intriguing piece of evidence challenging the established timeline is the erosion patterns found on the Sphinx. While the mainstream view attributes the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre's era, some some geologists, what's a geologist? Some geologists and researchers argue that the erosional features on the monument are indicative of water erosion, possibly caused by heavy rainfall. The Sahara Desert, where the pyramids are located, experienced significantly wetter periods in ancient times, and some argue that this level of rainfall could have caused the observed water-related wear on the Sphinx. If this hypothesis holds true, it would suggest the Sphinx, and by extension the pyramids, are much older than previously assumed. Let's take a look at that Sphinx again. Right, so you can see that wear on the torso. Some of that, maybe that's some of that sands over the years, but it definitely looks like water. Skipping ahead some. Some researchers suggest that the origins of the pyramids could be linked to advanced civilizations that predates ancient Egypt. The notion of lost civilizations and knowledge passed down through the ages is not new, and many cultures around the world possess legends of great civilizations that existed in the distant past. We'll see the same with Greece and the Minoans. In fact, we touch on the Minoans of Crete in this week's reading, weeks 6 and 7. Of course, the Romans were preceded by the Etruscans, and there were people before the Celts. So that's a very interesting idea. There's always, strangely enough, there always seems to be another group of people, at least into the mists of time. There's always a pre-existing group of people, as far back as the records allow. While these theories can be highly speculative, they remind us that our understanding of history is always evolving, and we must remain open to new evidence and interpretations, except for online search engines, who apparently can have the final say in these things. Conclusion. The age of the pyramids remains an enigma, with intriguing evidence hinting at the possibility that they are older than traditionally believed. The water erosion on the Sphinx and the precision of astronomical alignments, carbon dating anomalies, and the notion of lost civilizations all contribute to the ongoing debate surrounding these ancient marvels. Regardless of the age, the pyramids will continue to captivate our imagination, serving as a testament to the ingenuity and cultural legacy of the ancient Egyptians. As technology, well, maybe not. Well, maybe not, because if they didn't actually build them, then we have another discussion on our hands. Anyway, as technology advances and new archaeological discoveries come to light, we may eventually unravel the true mystery behind the construction and age of these timeless monuments. Until then, the pyramids will continue to stand tall, guarding their secret, inviting us to wonder about the distant past and the ancient civilizations that once ruled the sand of time. Autumn Domine Miserere Nobis, Deo Gracias. Okay, just to wet our whistle there with the age of the pyramids. The pyramids might be a lot older than we think. Okay. So, writing, let's hop into that. Make sure the tech is working. Okay. All right. I think we are good. How's that Chinese music doing? Okay. You're feeling sufficiently oriental? We do cover the Chinese, by the way, in this week's reading. So that's the that's the plugin, incidentally. The opening music, I didn't mention this. How do I get out of this? What are we? We're students. We're all perpetual students here. The opening music came from a video game about 20 years gone by called Pharaoh. And so that was the loop. You would listen to that music as you were building up your ancient Egyptian city, fighting off the sea peoples and Hyksos and whatever. Okay, but let's get back to writing, because this is where it all starts. Oh my goodness. Well, don't start if you can't upload the article and move it around. Okay. Writing is the physical manifestation of spoken language. It is thought that human beings develop language, not writing, language, 35,000 years before Christ, as evidenced by the the cave paintings from the period of the Cro-Magnon man, which appear to express concepts concerning daily life, right? We looked at that, the hunt in particular, as well as religious concepts. Uh, okay. Written language, however, does not emerge until its invention in Sumer, southern Mesopotamia, around 35 or 30 centuries BC. This early writing was called cuneiform and consisted of making specific marks in wet clay with a reed implement. Let's take a look at that again. Give an image to that effect. And of course, it'll be the last one I click on. There we go. So again, this is our cuneiform. Wonder if it's a phonetic language. Let's see if they get to that. Is it phonetic or more hieroglyphic? Oh, there we go. We answered ourselves, or they answered us. The phonetic writing system of the Greeks, and later Romans came from Phoenicia. Oh, that's interesting. Phonetic comes from Phoenicia. The Phoenician writing system, though quite different from that of Mesopotamia, still owes its development to the Sumerians and their advances in the written word. Independently of the Near East or Europe, writing was developed in Mesoamerica by the Maya, with some evidence suggesting a date as early as 500 BCE, and also independently as well by the Chinese. Writing in China, whence our background music, developed from divination rites using oracle bones, 12 centuries before Christ. It appears to also have arisen independently, as there is no evidence of cultural transference at this time between China and Mesopotamia. The ancient Chinese practice of divination involved etching marks on bones or shells, which were then heated under the until they cracked. The cracks would then be interpreted by a diviner. If that diviner had etched "next Tuesday it will rain" and "next Tuesday it will not rain," the pattern of the cracks on the bones or shells would tell him which would be the case. In time, these etchings evolved into the Chinese script, also into the I Ching. History, as I've said probably a dozen times in the past few weeks, history is impossible without the written word, as one would lack context in which to interpret physical evidence from the ancient past. Writing records records the lives of a people, and so it is the first necessary step in the written history of a culture or civilization. A prime example of this problem is the difficulty scholars of the late 19th and early 20th centuries CE had in understanding the Maya civilization, and that they could not read the glyphs of the Maya and so wrongly, therefore, interpreted much of the physical evidence they excavated. The early explorers of the Maya rites, such as Stevens and Catherwood, believed that they had found evidence of an ancient Egyptian civilization in Central America. I'm open to that sort of alternative archaeology myself, but in here they adduce it as an example of failing to properly read a people's language. So you make conclusions even if you don't completely have the evidence, and that's how you get with the idea of the Egyptians in Central America. Although I, once again, am open to that sort of thing. It's not a zero-sum game. Both propositions could be correct. People could make incorrect conclusions not knowing the data because they don't know the language, the written language, and the Egyptian could still be in Central America. Those are not mutually exclusive propositions. This same problem is evident in understanding the ancient kingdom of Meroe in modern Sudan, whose Meroitic script is yet to be deciphered, as well as the so-called linear A script of the ancient Minoan culture of Crete, which also is yet to be understood. The invention. The Sumerians first invented writing as a means of long-distance communication, which was necessitated by trade. And once again, it's interesting that the first records we have are, yes, commercial records. And where do they find them? Where do the archaeologists come across them? In temples. right? The temple is also, getting to an earlier point I made, the center of commerce. The god protects the commerce, blesses the money, blesses the transaction. Everything springs out of the temple as a human institution there. The rise of the cities in Mesopotamia and the need for resources which were lacking in the region, long-distance trade developed, and with it, the need to be able to communicate across expanses between cities or regions. The earliest form of writing was pictographs. These are symbols which represented objects and served to aid in remembering such things as which parcels of grain had gone to which destination or how many sheep were needed for events like sacrifices in the temple. These pictographs were impressed onto wet clay, which was then dried, and these became the official records of commerce. As beer was very popular in ancient and modern Mesopotamia and the world, many of the earliest records extant. That's a good history word. Extant means still in existence. Right? If it's extant, it's still in existence. If it's been lost to time, it is not extant. If we just have a copy of it. The earliest extant records we have to do with the sale of beer. With pictographs, one could tell how many jars or vats of beer were involved in a transaction, but not necessarily what that transaction meant. So you can see it's very interesting with writing, going back to some earlier religious points that I made, you can see the desire to transcend mortality and also transcend temporality. So with divination, from whence comes Chinese writing originally, you're trying to peer into the future, that look at time, which we have the least ability to discern, unless you take the courses, the historical courses class at ApocatastasisInstitute. Well, ordinarily, right, we're constantly casting about for the future. That's where we don't know about that. We know something about the present. We know a lot about the past to a certain extent. We at least have a lot of data about the past. We have very little ways, except for spidey senses and these ideas of cycles and divination, to figure out what's coming up next, which is interesting. So the aspect of life which we have the least data for is the one we're most interested in as a species. And you can see that with language here, it's breaking mortality and temporality. So you're trying to divinize the future, trying to extend your reach and consciousness into the future. And with writing at the same time, you are extending your will. We'll talk about governments and this sort of thing, written laws in the future, right? But the written word allows you, especially if you're a ruler, to extend your will, or a merchant to extend your will. You can write a letter or a contract to someone on the other side of the world. Guys like Hanno can take it there for you. So mankind is transcending his spatial limitations, his ignorance of the future, and by writing in general, you're also transcending death in a sense, because you're speaking from the grave, speaking for thousands of years later. It's remarkable. Okay, so let's bring the ship to port for this simile, the voyage of Hanno. Now that you can write, you can also send messages, and you can get a bit more curious, and you can build off of knowledge now that you can write. So the Phoenicians, this is a famous event, a famous expedition. Here we are, as of this broadcast, in the octave of Columbus Day. We're in the week following Columbus Day, and so we have a lot of explorers on the brain. We read that the Phoenicians were known as the greatest navigators on the antiquity. Already a typo. And the first to have sailed over all the seas of the ancient world. Those of them established in the cities of the Eastern Mediterranean, Ugarit, Arwad, Bablos, Tyre, Sidon, as their descendants settled on various trading posts and all known territories at the time, especially the Carthaginians, marked history with their journeys and their exploits. Ancient texts have kept some of these narratives. Several engraved inscriptions have brought forward for us the names of some vessel owners or shipmates during the event. This discovery journey or that of war. I think this is a translated website, so you can see a certain clunkiness in the sentence structure. We mentioned some of these exploits: the voyage of King Hiram of Tyre and Solomon, the country of Ophir in the 10th century, the expedition founded by the pharaoh Necho II, exploratory trips of the Carthaginians, Hanno and Himilcon, to Africa and to northern Europe. All these voyages were intended to find gold and riches, as well as indisputable raw materials for the handicraft development and trade. This did not prevent them to combine business with pleasure and seek, in the same time, new routes, as well as strategic locations for the establishment of new trade counters, in order new ways to regulate and count and measure trade, in order to facilitate their progression on the road for discovering new lands. History has retained a summary of these trips. The only one which has reached us is that of the Carthaginian Hanno. This famous exploit would have happened in the first quarter of the 5th century. It was named in the annals of maritime exploration as the Periplus of Hanno. The narration of the journey was engraved on the walls of Melkart Temple at Carthage, which was destroyed by the Romans as well as the entire city. The story has been reported through the transcriptions carried out on the site, the visitors and Greek historians. Was it utopia or reality? Is it the full text or is it altered? True or enigmatic? We can only say that this maritime expedition was considered like a state affair. And now we have a translation of the Greek text. This is the story of the long voyage of Hanno, king of the Carthaginians, into Libyan lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which he dictated on a tablet in the temple of Kronos. And then it's numbered sentence by sentence. And I think we have like maybe 15 sentences. The Carthaginians decided that Hanno should sail beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Those are the Straits of Gibraltar out into the Atlantic, and found cities of the Libya Phoenicians. He set out with 60 guys. Hold on. Penny conters, I think 60 ships, and about 30,000 men and women, and provisions and all other necessities. After sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules for 2 days, we founded the first, which we called Three Meaterion. Below it was a large plain. Sailing thence westward, we come to Solois, a Libyan promontory covered with trees. There we founded a temple to Poseidon. Journeying eastward for half a day, we reached a lake not far from the sea, covered with a great growth of tall reeds, where elephants and many other wild animals feed. A day's sea journey beyond this lake, we founded 5 new cities on the coast, called Karikan Tekos, Dite, Accra, Lalitha, and Arambis. So they're going down the west coast of Africa. Passing from there, we come to the very large river Lixos, flowing from Libya, beside which the nomads called Lixete pastured their flocks. We stayed some time with them and become their friends. Inland from there dwelt inhospitable Ethiopians in a land ridden with wild beasts and hemmed in by great mountains. They say that the Lixos flows down from there, and that amongst these mountains troglodytes of strange appearance dwell, who according to the Lixete can run more swiftly than horses. Taking interpreters from the Lixte, we sailed south along the desert shore for 2 days, and then for 1 day eastward, and found a small island 5 stades in circumference at the further end of the Gulf. We made a settlement there and called it Cerne. We judged from our journey that it was directly opposite Carthage, off the voyage from Carthage to the Pillars of Hercules, and from there to Cyrenae steamed alike. From here, sailing up a big river called Curates, we reach a lake in which there were 3 islands bigger than Cyrenae. Completing a day's sail from here, we come to the end of the lake, overhung by some very high mountains crowded with savages clad in skins and wild beasts who stoned us and beat us off and prevented us from disembarking. Sailing from there, we come to another big wide river teeming with crocodiles and hippopotamuses. We turned again from there and come back to Cherney. We sailed south for 12 days from there, clinging to the coast, which was all along occupied by Ethiopians who did not stay their ground, but fled from us. Their speech was unintelligible even to our Lixate. On the last day, we come to high mountains clad with trees whose wood was sweet smelling and mottled. Sailing round these for 2 days, we reached an immense gulf, on either shore of which was a plain, where by night we saw big and little fires flaming up at intervals everywhere. Taking on water at this point, we sailed for 5 days along the coast until we come to a great bay, which our interpreters called the Horn of the West. It was a large island, and in the island a saltwater lake, within which was another island, where we disembarked. By day we could see nothing but a forest, but by night we saw many fires burning, and we heard the sound of flutes and of beating cymbals and drums and a great din of voices. Fear come upon us, and the soothsayers bade us leave the island. We sailed thence in haste and skirted a fiery coast replete with burning incense. Great streams of fire and lava poured down into the sea, and the land was unapproachable because of the heat. We left there hurriedly in fear, and sailing for days we saw the land by night full of flames. In the middle was a high flame taller than the rest, reaching as it seemed the stars. By day it was seen to be a very high mountain called the Chariot of the Gods. And so he goes on here. I'll just read the last one. At the farther end of this bay was an island like the first, with a lake, within which was another island full of savages. By far the greater number were women with shaggy bodies, whom our interpreters called gorillas. Chasing them, we were unable to catch any of the men, all of whom, being used to climbing precipices, got away, defending themselves by throwing stones. We caught 3 women who bit and mangled those who carried them off, being unwilling to follow them. We killed them, however, and flayed them and brought their skins back to Carthage, for we did not sail further as our supplies gave out. Autumn Domine miserere nobis. Thus is the remarkable journey of Hanno made possible for our enjoyment and daring do because of reading, which is our main topic today. We would not have this if we did not have writing. You can see the value of this technology. Okay, well, I have to get ready for my next class here. Once again, this is the weekly project installation, and you can download the text by going to our website in the description. And I would very much encourage you to consider, of course, I clicked out of my website. I would very much encourage you to consider going to our website, ticking below, and consider indeed enrolling in perhaps a Cycles of History course, or even some commitment formally to the project. You're obviously always welcome to join in these weekly presentations, but we do have a lot more depth you can get into if you enroll in monthly or bi-monthly seminars, or indeed full-time enrollment. With that being said, I'm going to go get my coffee ready and get ready for Greek. So take care now. Bye-bye.